Good morning, everybody. Glad to be back this first Saturday morning in December. My name is Ed Samuel. I'm a career coach with a firm called Sam Nova. We're based in Kennett Square, PA, and serve clients in greater Philadelphia area and across the U.S. You know, this morning we're going to tackle a pretty tough subject, and it has to do with landing a job when you get to 55 plus. And, you know, how do we deal with this whole issue of age discrimination that comes up time and time again? And is there anything we can do about it? You know, I've personally worked over the years with countless clients who are 50, 55, 60, 65, 70. And even a couple of years ago, a person who was 78 years old who wanted to get back to work and not work as a consultant, but work in a company in a permanent role. And that person, believe it or not, landed that job at 78 on a permanent position and has been there for 2 years. Now, sometimes, you know, people come to me and say, hey, Ed, you know, I have no interest in retiring. Some people have come to me and say, Ed, I retired at 63. And after 2 years of spending way too much time with my spouse, we're about ready to kill each other. And can you get me back to work? And that's happened. But certainly I've had clients that are 65, 70, and they want to get back to work, you know, and some people have got married late in life and they have children who are in middle school and they're 55, 58 years old, and they have college to look forward to on the horizon. So they're working for a different reason. And of course, there are some people that work because they really need to financially, but for many people, they can't see themselves sitting, not doing too much for the next 25 years. Or 20 years or whatever that is, and they want to get back to work. So the problem is, right, when they go to get back to work, when they start to apply for jobs, they start to network, they start to talk to people, they hit this thing called the age bias, and that age bias is real. Now, here's how I kind of view the age bias, and this isn't an easy discussion. When I'm talking to clients, I simply say, look, if you applied for 10 jobs and you meet the minimum qualifications, I promise you half of them, there's going to be an age bias that you're not going to work around. These people have a bias about you once you get to that 55 or 60 year mark. In their minds, no matter what you do, and it doesn't matter how great your resume is, it doesn't matter who your career coach is, it doesn't matter which networking forums you go to, you're not going to get the job because that bias is so strong against you. But on the good news, the other news, though, is that in my experience, the other 50% of the people, you know, of those 10 jobs, 5, you're not going to even, you know, it won't matter what you do. But there's another 5 that if you can pass the muster and get, you know, and they invite you in, then you have to compete. So my point being is that 50% of the time, you're not going to go anywhere, because that bias is so real. The other 50% of the time, you are going to be pulled into an interview, and you have to work really, really hard. Now, before I start talking about some things that we could do to fight it and some actions you can take, you know, let's just go back to the bias. What's it based on? You know, you're sitting there and your person's looking at you, and what's going through their mind is, you know, hey, so when are you going to retire? If you're 65, why should I invest in you? And training, effort, everything just to see you retire in a year or two. I want a longer return on my investment. So that's out there. You also hear people who are honestly saying, hey, look, you know, I'm looking for somebody with a long runway. You know, I want somebody who's going to be here for 10 or 15 years. You have another group of people saying, hey, you know, you've been at it so long, but, you know, especially if you were at one company and one job, people start thinking, well, you're just not current any longer, you know, and we'll talk about current in a few minutes, what that all means. They're looking at you and they're saying, no, you know, are you as sharp as you were 10 years ago? You know, are your skills transferable? Some people are going to say, hey, you know, you want just too much money and we can't go there. Somebody else is going to look at you and say, hey, you know, you're looking to come here and be my boss. And somebody else will say, hey, you know, you're carrying yourself in a little bit too almost in a pious mode, an arrogant mode, and you make the interviewer feel uncomfortable because of how senior you are. So there's this uncomfortableness feeling that can set in during to create that bias. And of course, somebody's going to say, well, you know, you're set in your ways. you're old school. No matter what you do, no matter what we say, it's just going to be your way. And then on the complete flip side, if you put the onus back on the person who's interviewing you, there is a level of business immaturity that's going on when people are just taking this hard and fast look at someone and saying, well, here are all the reasons why I really want to discount this person and not even move forward with an interview. Or let's say if you do get an interview, all these things are running through people's minds and they're discounting you. And again, I believe there's a level of business immaturity that goes on when hiring managers are making that call about you prematurely. And because many, many times all part or none of it is true. And that has to do with, some other factors we'll talk about. So again, kind of recap, age bias is real. I just make an argument 50% of the time. It really doesn't matter what you do. But these factors that I just talked about, this is going through some people's mind. But if you can get into the interview process, now you have to compete. Now, there's a notion out there in the career coaching world and in some of the networking forums that, hey, only show 15 years on your resume. And we'll trick them. We'll trick people to think, oh, this must be a young buck. Let's bring this person in. They must only be 35 years old. And then you show up and they kind of put two to two together and they ask the infamous question. So you went from high school, college, and now you went directly to the vice president at this last company. How did you do that? And then immediately you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to then explain, well, I worked at this company and I worked at that company. And then basically it becomes problematic because at that point now your integrity is in question. And my argument is the bias has never changed just because once they figure out how old you are, the 50% who aren't going to hire you, they're not going to hire you no matter what. And I go into great detail about this particular point of 15 years on the resume in my newly released book on Amazon called Optimize Your Resume, The Do's and Don'ts, the Sam Nova Way. That's available again via Amazon, but I talk about that in my new book because it's such a big factor. Now, you ask yourself, is there anything you can do to kind of fight this whole notion of, this bias that's out there? But let's kind of focus on, let's say you get through it, even the screening and they're either going to bring you in for that interview. What are some things that you have to do to make sure that this bias is being challenged and you're working hard? And sometimes it's not just one giant thing or two giant things. I've put together a hard list of over 40 things, actions that a person needs to take to combat age bias going into the job marketplace. And, this morning, I'm probably going to only be able to hit on about 10 of them. But these 10 are important, certainly not even near the full list. But I'm going to kind of walk through some actions you can take to try to fight off this age bias, no matter what age you are. Again, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75. But here are some things that you have to go focus in on. So let's start with number one. And number one is, it sounds so simple, but it starts with a resume. And when you get older, you get more experienced. My rule of thumb is your resume better not be good. It better not be very good. It's got to hit the excellence level. And a big part of what I talk about in my book is the importance of a value proposition and something that you can really rally around and tie it to your true market value. And look, there's a fundamental rule that I really believe in. The older you are, the more experience you have, the greater probability is that you have a greater market value, and your value proposition has to be stronger, should be stronger. And where the mistake is made, and I've seen it happen countless times, is that if you don't create that resume with a strong value proposition that matches your experience and your age, what happens is that your resume starts to morph into the same kind of resume that a 40-year-old has, a 35-year-old has, and it all looks the same. And then what happens is that you've taken away your competitive advantage as an older worker, and you kind of level the playing field with the same kind of resume. And then what happens is you get the same types of questions, and you might be by far the stronger candidate. But if that value proposition is not pronounced on that resume, what ends up happening is that it will always go to the younger person as a rule. And it has to do with the amount of effort put into that resume. One other piece, and just on resume, is that the other thing that you don't make the mistake of using words that are almost that don't need to be said. And now, again, in my book, I talk about fluff words, F-L-U-F-F, fluff words. Stay away from highly energetic, stay away from successful, stay away from words that are just, well, why are you not excellent in everything? Why are you not a strong person in everything that you do? Why are you not results driven? Why are you telling me these things? Because what happens when you get to be an older worker, by you really stressing these areas on a resume, you're actually reminding people, hey, these could be potential concerns. Why are you reminding me that, that you have high energy? Well, you better have high energy. You're competing. Now, here's another one. So here's number 2. Leverage your greatest successes in what you've done in the past. And again, if that's where I don't believe resumes should go back only 15 years. Go back 20 years. Talk about an accomplishment 25 years ago. And my argument is that the skills, the competencies, the strengths that you had to accomplish something 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if you've kept those strengths and competencies current and you're just as sharp, all those skills are transferable into the new role today. So this notion of I only have to focus on the last 5 years, 10 years of successes to make an argument that, you're going to be the best person for this job, I don't support that in any way, shape, or form. If you implemented ERP 18 years ago, I promise you, for those who have implemented ERP, enterprise resource planning system in a manufacturing environment, you went through an awful lot. And if you led that effort, the chances of you not remembering how to do any of that 20 years later, 15 years later, and you couldn't bring any of those skills forward in a transferable way, well, if you can't do it, then that's a problem. But for most people, they can do it. And they need to make that argument on their resume and make that argument that they're still current and those skills still are in play when you're in that interview. Now, I always remember a client of mine who was a dean at one of the major universities in the U.S., and her number one accomplishment was something that happened 34 years ago, her very first job. And that was first and foremost on her resume and what she accomplished in that job. And what it meant to her was that it defined who she was, her actions, how she behaved in every job since that job, that very first job. And she used that as a rallying point when she interviews with no hesitation, no lack of confidence. It helped define who she was. And she wasn't scared to bring it up. So I could just go on with countless examples. So let's talk about number 3. Here's the third thing you need to do. And this sounds so simple, but we make mistakes here. Be current on social media, especially LinkedIn. Everything has to be sharp. You have to have a full profile, a sharp, clear picture. I even recommend having a Twitter account because, at quick glance on social media, if you're completely outdated and you're 60 years old, and at the interview, you're talking about how current you are on things, what ends up happening is that they see lack of social media skills, and the person who's interviewing is thinking, they look a little bit old. They're acting a little bit old based on what I could see of their inaction on LinkedIn. And what happened is you're feeding the bias. And look, in the end, LinkedIn, social media, this isn't rocket science. And every single client I meet with, when we work through no LinkedIn to a full LinkedIn, I think everyone's pleasantly surprised that you can get there very quickly, because a lot of the other things that you have done and you're skilled in and you're experienced in are 1,000,000,000% harder. But if you lack that presence, if you lack that social media strength, you can get perceived by even junior recruiters screening you, or even the hiring manager looking at your profile that, hey, this person's just kind of not with it. And again, should it make or break a decision? I don't think so, but necessarily. But at the same token, this is a factor. And spending that time doing it is pretty important. Now, the other thing that goes hand in hand with that, number 4 here is, have a formal network. If you're experienced, you have 30 some years of experience, and I go to a LinkedIn profile and I see that you have 72 connections. You had 72 connections within 100 square feet, of where you sat, let alone 72 connections, in 30 years. You have that many people in your family that's probably on LinkedIn. So what happens is that the smaller your formal network, you create an impression to a hiring manager in a company, a recruiter, that, hey, this person, really hasn't stayed with it, has really not been current, hasn't built a formal network. And that creates, again, a perception that you're behind, not current. And building that formal network takes time, and there's effort involved. And that's why you need people like a career coach to help you with that. So let's go to number 5. Number 5, and I mentioned this in my book, how many outside organizations are you part of? And if, you're older, you're 60, 65, 55, even 50, I'm looking at a resume, I'm saying, which organizations are you connected to? Professional outside organizations that's keeping your saw sharp. Who are you, rubbing shoulders with? Where are you getting benchmark information from? Where are you on the bleeding edge? Or are you basically not part of anything? You have no outside influences helping you, push you. Because I could tell you, I've seen countless examples where when you're part of a professional organization, you get a double look by a recruiter. And since I was a recruiter for more than 4 years, I looked for those things. I looked for where people were staying current all the time. But you're trying to combat, again, this age bias of, are you current? Are you on top of things? And some of these organizations are not expensive to join. It's a matter of, some cases $49 a year. And you get to go to a couple of events, and you get to put it on your resume, and you get to talk about some current issues. Now, number 6, it kind of goes hand in hand with that, is technical training. I had a recent client, a COO, who just landed a job. 30 plus years of experience. He's kind of a lean expert, never got his lean certification, but here he is 30 years later, going and saying, you know what, Ed, I got to get that lean certification, and I'm going for it, and it's going to get done. Even though I've implemented lean concepts and I'm probably an expert considered as compared to many, but I'm still going to get that certification. He worked really hard in getting that certification, but he landed a job recently, and one of the screeners, really a senior consultant, before he was able to go into that final interview, that senior consultant grilled him on the depth of his technical knowledge as it relates to lean. And it was an amazing thing because he was so current on that certification, so current on that subject matter, had done his homework, that he was able to answer those questions tenfold. And I think really just blew away the consultant. Now, these were lean methodologies, some of which he learned 20 years ago. And he's just gotten better and better and better at it. But he stayed current, and he's continuing the technical training. And in this particular example, it made all the difference for an older worker to just completely destroy the age bias and say, hey, this person's staying current. So current, they were able to go, do some really, really amazing things. So let's hit one more. We may not get to all 10 today, but let's get to number 7. Many, many times during an interview, especially when it comes to an older worker, what you don't say in that interview kills you far more than what you do say. And I hear this many times. Hey, how did the interview go? Well, hey, Ed, I think it went well. Well, did you get the job? No, I got a letter saying, we found more qualified candidates. And I said, well, why do you think it went well? Well, because they asked me all these questions and I gave them great answers. And I said, well, what did you not say? I said, well, what do you mean, Ed? I said, well, did you tell them unequivocally that you plan to work for the next 10 years? Because they're not legally allowed to ask you that. But if you don't state it, guess what they're sitting there assuming? Hey, this person's going to be here for another couple of years and then basically retire. Did you tell me you have great health? You go to the gym every day. That, you're, it's kind of an implied way of saying that, you're good to go. Have you talked about the fact that you're attending a national conference? In other words, what are you putting out there to, whether it's asked or not asked about your plans? And if you don't say these things, it kills you, because they're assuming those things after the interview's over, and they're talking about those things privately. But I will tell you this, though, when it comes to stating things, and I could go on and on this topic, but I'm a big believer of making sure when you're making these comments, they're not fake. And I think older workers, as you get older, I think it's harder to fake things. Not that I'm a big fan of faking anything, but what I'm saying is that when you tell somebody you want to work someplace for the next 10 years, they have to, that person who's interviewing you, they have to see it in your eyes, and you have to be speaking from the heart and make it genuine, not staged, not just a comment, because that's what they're counting on. They're counting on being able to rely on what you're saying is going to be true if they're going to make that investment in you. So there's a few more to get to, but like I said, I'm only scratching the surface. There's about 40 things to do, and this is not, I think I covered 7 this morning. Hopefully you're giving, it gives you a little bit of a sense that this is hard work to go after and combat this age bias that's out there. 50%, they're not going to support you no matter what. But the 50% that do, where you have to compete, everything's got to be sharp. I wish I could tell you that it's easy, but it's not. I worked with just simply too many people. I want to thank you for being here with us this morning, and we're just about out of time. So please join us again on our next Optimize Your Career program, which will be Saturday, December 20th. We'll be talking about the myths of cold calling. This is Ed Samuel, career coach with Sam Nova. Our website is www.samnovainc.com. If you'd like to reach me with a question or a comment, email me at samnovainc.com, or call our main number at 610-274-8214. Make it a great weekend. So long for now, and God bless.